I'm a fellow Hilton alum, currently studying with Dr. Weiser. That's Nick Weiser, good friend from Eastman. At Fredonia, we have a concert tomorrow. I'm potentially soloing over my first bebop head, and I'm struggling to connect my brain and hand. Do you have any tips for simple but effective bebop lines? Simple and effective bebop lines. Curtis Fuller, The Stroller. Find that. He's got some really simple bebop scale stuff that he does that lays really well on the trombone. The thing about playing bebop is you just have to play that language, and that means tools. It means transcriptions. You've got to just play through that kind of vocabulary. So find bebop vocabulary to play through and get it under your slide. Open up the Omnibook, the Charlie Parker Omnibook, and start just playing through stuff. You got to get the language under your slide. So bebop scales, chromatic scales, arpeggios, obviously diminished. If you can learn some diminished scales, I mean, you're going to do that in a day, probably not. That's a lot to learn in a day. But something simple and effective for your concert tomorrow would be just a bebop scale from C, B, B flat, A, G, F, E, D, C. Play that from all scale degrees. So start that scale, and then go up the scale and resolve it to F, right? So. And finding ways to start on different notes of that scale and resolve them to F major, right? Something like that. Hopefully that's somewhat useful. But, in a day, you can't really do anything in terms of like internalizing a whole language in a day. So you're just on the beginning of your journey. So don't worry about it. Just go and play your solo, and then keep on moving. There's always a lot to unpack there. Okay, so what was the last trombone etude you worked on that has been challenging to master? I don't really work. Well, yeah, I've been working on Arbin's exercises, Arbin's characteristic studies. They're all hard in different ways, but I used number one from Wycliffe Gordon. Wycliffe Gordon assigned characteristic study number one to me a long time ago. I've used that with a lot of my students, and they'll tell you that I've tortured them with it as well. Sorry guys, but it's a really effective tool. And so the Arbin's book is something that I didn't spend that much time with as an undergrad or a high school student, so I have found that those exercises have been nice to come to work on as well. So I'm doing Arbin's, I think it's number 3. But I don't really do jazz etudes that much. I've written some etudes trying to kind of create. If I do an etude over a jazz tune, it's usually about incorporating a specific skill or exercise. Like I'd put out a book of etudes, get set. And so there's like some jazz language etudes, but the other half of it is like voice leading etudes, where it's like trying to, I usually call it like Bachify, basically like chord changes, playing like, like a Bach cello suite type of thing. I'm really not trying to say that these are on the level of Bach's genius. Like let me just say that. I'm not purporting to be that. But playing through some changes in a similar kind of way, it helps you as a single note player in particular to hear the voice leading and practice the voice leading as that single note player rather than relying on harmony and hearing the harmony. What was the last price of wisdom someone gave you on your playing? Piece of wisdom. How did that affect your view of yourself? I don't know, actually. One that popped to my mind, I think, because somebody had just said Ryan Keberly a minute ago. I remember Ryan Keberly, he told me, I guess it was a little while, I don't remember which record I gave him, and he was giving me some advice. Well, I just asked him what he thought about the record and, if he had any advice of ways to move forward. And he just told me that he felt like it was too safe. And I thought that was an interesting observation, and I kind of agree. And as I'm putting together new music for a new project, I've noticed that sometimes I do tend to kind of go to the safe thing, because I've developed kind of like a thing, like my band plays like this kind of a thing, and it's comfortable, and it's hard to break out of. Yeah, but just that conceptually maybe it was too safe, or that it didn't challenge, like I didn't challenge myself enough to break out of like the way I normally play. I don't know that he was necessarily saying that it was good or bad. He was just saying like, knowing me and knowing my playing, he just felt like it was kind of like a safe version of it. And for him, he could have used more chances, take more risks. I thought that was an interesting observation, and I've thought about it. I would like to think that I could embrace that more, but I think just like we've talked about, when you're practicing, you have to practice things you're bad at, and that's a difficult hurdle to get over. To practice things you're bad at, to sound bad all the time, those are hard things to get yourself to do sometimes. Stephen Pressfield said in one of his books that the amateur believes he must first overcome his fear, then he can do his work. The professional knows that fear can never be overcome. He knows that there's no such thing as a fearless warrior or a dread-free artist. Thoughts on that? My thoughts on that. My thoughts are that he's correct. The professional makes it happen, no matter the fear, right? No matter all the doubts and the resistance, like he talks about. If you're a professional, you do the thing, like you do it. You just make it happen. I have that all the time. Dread, artistic dread. Like, oh man, is this gonna suck? Am I gonna make this happen? Can I get this project finished? All that stuff. Man, it doesn't just go away. If you're a professional, you claim to be a professional, like I claim to be. You make it happen. You decide on the project that you're doing, and then you figure out a way to execute it, and then connect people with it the best you can. What could jazz education curriculums do better about preparing a student for real-world opportunities and networking? First of all, no curriculum is perfect. Jazz education does get a lot of ridicule in general, but I find that it's kind of like it's both good and bad. That the jazz education curriculum in general, like on a broad scale, not talking about any school in particular, but just talking about the fact that now you can go to school for jazz music, and you have been able to for 30 or 40 years. Like my generation, for example, like almost all of us went to jazz school. The parts of jazz school that help are the social ones, right? So like you learn a certain amount of skills from your classes, regardless of where you go, and it's about how you apply it. And you can apply that information whether you go to the best, most famous school or the smallest, least famous school. The notes are the same, the information is the same. It's how you connect with the professors and your fellow students, and what projects you can create, and what can you make happen with the information you're getting out of the curriculum. The curriculum is the curriculum, like it's whether it's a busier one or a less busy one. It's up to you to take it and run with it. I wish that there was room in the curriculum to make everyone do more projects, but there's so much, like for example in our curriculum at UT, it's so full of things already that there's no room to like add more. And all the things are important, like ensembles and playing in groups and like small group and big band and theory and piano class and all the things. I can't find one where I'm like, okay, well that's useless, and I think mostly jazz curriculum, the way it's taught is different at different places, but mostly like what you do, jazz history, improv class, all this stuff is kind of universal at a certain point. Like we didn't really have improv class at Eastman. It was rolled into ensemble. We call it jazz performance workshop. It's kind of theory, kind of improv class, kind of a performance-based class. Like it's a lot of things wrapped into one, or at least it was. When I went there. And at Juilliard we had an improv class, but it wasn't really much of a class because the class was huge. There was like 15 of us in the class or more, and like we would play hour-long versions of tunes, and it was like you played your couple courses and then just sat around. So that wasn't effective either. In terms of the curriculum, like the only best thing I can say is that you got to go and make it happen for yourself. Like no matter where you go to school, it's up to you to develop the network of peers, because they're the ones that call you for stuff. Like your professor can like open up a few doors. My professors have opened up important doors for me along the way, 100%. And I will not give them credit, because they absolutely did. Make it happen for yourself. You got to figure it out for yourself, and you got to make bands, make projects, have organizations, be a leader amongst your peers. And those are the people that I get calls from. Those are the people that I talk to. Those are the people that are my friends, my people I rely on, or the people that I went to school with. Personal recommendations. I need somebody for this. I ask somebody I trust. Evo asked, what about the curriculum at UNT? So the curriculum at UNT it's a little complicated with us because it's a state school, it's a big school, so there are certain academic requirements that the undergrads have to take, right? Whereas like at Eastman there were some, but not as much as maybe UNT has in terms of like humanities classes, or like, what do they call them here? Just like core classes, academic type classes. But like arranging, improv class, small ensemble, large ensemble, all that stuff is the same. There's some kind of like weekly get together, The thing that happens here is that because our program is large, so that means there's a large amount of classes, there's a large amount of performing ensembles, which means there's a large amount of concerts, which means everyone's time gets pulled in a million directions, which can be really difficult for many of us to deal with, students and faculty. I don't think we really need to add things. We just need to continue to push towards a curriculum that is more inclusive of creation, not just like talking at people. And I think we have been doing that. At a certain point, like, it is what it is. Like, you're going to school to get a jazz degree, you need to know tunes, you need to know vocabulary, you need to do transcriptions, you need to take lessons, those are the things you would expect. Can you recommend any theory books for neophytes that want to learn in addition to the horn? I don't know that there's like necessarily like a theory book I would recommend. I think that in jazz, it's like theory in process, right? And in theory in practice. And improvisation is knowing all those things. But there's FAUX is the name of this guy. It's Counterpoint. It's a counterpoint book. And it teaches species counterpoint. And I think it's super effective in terms of learning tunes and understanding how harmony works. You just learn species counterpoint and you start to improvise in species counterpoint. So species counterpoint is note against note, 2 notes against note, 3 notes against note, 4 notes against 1 note. And there's rules about how the notes move from consonants to dissonance and dissonance to consonants. And it's not that you need to follow all the rules 100% of the time, but knowing the rules is pretty important. Knowing the rules is pretty important to gaining understanding. And then once you understand, you can make whatever choice you want with that information. That's fine. Like, I don't necessarily think that you need to be dogmatic about following the rules all the time, but you can be like, that sounds weird. Oh, maybe it's because I'm breaking the rules of counterpoint. In terms of theory, I would go to a jazz piano book, the jazz piano book. But ultimately, theory is pretty easy. It's just a way of organizing the notes, and there's many ways to do that. So if you think about kind of a systematic approach to it, this guy named Miles Okazaki, great guitar player, he's got a great book. What does he call it? Modern Guitar Fundamentals. I forget what it's called. He was working on it when we used to teach jazz camp together. He was working on this book, and he just goes through, and it's got like all the different combinations of 2 notes, 3 notes, 4 notes, 5 notes, 6 notes, 7 notes. Because there's only 12 notes, so he goes through them all. And then he makes shapes out of them. Like, they have like 4-sided squares and rectangles and triangles. And you're just trying to learn about all the different ways to organize the notes. So there's 4 parent scales in terms of our 7-note scales. Like in Western music, we use these 7-note scales: major, melodic minor, harmonic major. So those are the 4 that give you all the 7-note scales, right, in the Western sense of harmony. And with those 4, there's 7 modes in each one. So there's the root mode, and then there's 6 other ones that go with it. Some of them we use all the time. A couple modes of harmonic minor we use frequently. A couple modes of melodic minor we use frequently. Sometimes harmonic major, definitely less so. But I think if you go through and you learn all of those sounds, you start to understand. So, like, you're just understanding that you're in a key, right? And then you're moving to another key. And that's how music works. It goes from one sound to the next, and it goes tonic, predominant, dominant. Now, maybe I'm oversimplifying, but you also have to look and analyze compositions and say, like, how do these people move? How does this work? And you'll notice, like, if you go to like Liszt versus Beethoven versus Wagner versus something more like, Liszt was like the more modern example in that, but like even more like Berg and all the Webern and these type of composers, like they're experimenting with different ways of organizing the pitches, and they're organizing tension and release. That's all it is. And so jazz has the same thing. If you go from bebop is kind of like the Baroque period, and then you go into like Wayne Shorter modal stuff, that's like the Romantic period, and then you go post that, it's just like the classical music now is like all these things. Like modern classical music is not only atonal, it's like a lot of things. The same with jazz, it's not only atonal. Modern is like means a lot of things. So if you can organize and know all the modes, of all four, and then you've got symmetrical scales like chromatic, whole tone, diminished, right? So that's like half steps, whole steps, minor thirds, major thirds. And then you got fourths and fifths and sixths and sevenths. But that kind of gets you through most of the information. If you want to go to like the Slonimsky book, that's where like Train was checking out. If you want to go and just like read theory textbooks, you could do that too. That sounds pretty boring to me though. Anyway, it's all about just figuring out on your own like how to organize the notes. Psychologically, artists have a challenging time with rejection in any setting. It's like we're programmed to think that rejection leads to failure. How much rejection did it take you to feel confident in knowing that there were bigger and better things ahead? That's an ongoing thing, man. It's ongoing. But the thing about being a musician, the thing about trying to do a lot of things, a lot of projects, is that you get rejection like almost all of the time, right? So you're booking a project. You just have to realize that a lot of times it has nothing to do with you, and it has nothing to do with your music, and it has nothing to do. And the hard part for artists is that our identity is intermingled with our work and is defined by our work. It's so intertwined and ingrained that we have a hard time disassociating someone not liking your music with not liking you, or like making a constructive comment means they don't like your music. Like those things are not necessarily true. Making an observation about something that could be better does not mean that I didn't like it, for example. But we get it in our head that could be the case. You just have to get a little bit of a thicker skin and not really care what anyone thinks, good or bad. You just have to make some stuff that you think is interesting, and you will find your audience, and you will find people that agree with your perspective, because not everyone will agree all the time, and I don't even like what I write sometimes, so how could I expect somebody else to? You have to be confident in what you're creating, or at least like this is me, here you go. And one phrase that I use, and I think it's especially relevant for like social media, the phrase "this is not for everyone," or like "this is not for you." Like when I make something, it's not for everyone, it's for only the people that want that thing. So if you don't like it, then it's not for you automatically, right? So if you think about it like that has helped me. Like, okay, well, if you don't like trombone, there's no chance my music is going to be appealing to you, right? Or if like you don't like modern jazz, whatever that means, you probably won't like my music. But if you do, then I hope that this is appealing to you, And so that's kind of how I've dealt with it, and how like I can keep posting on social media different types of things, because like, well, it's only for these people, so it would make sense that anyone that isn't that exact group of people wouldn't like it. So it doesn't bother me that like the saxophone players don't like my trombone technique video or something like that, because it's not for them. There's plenty of people that succeed in those like micro moments that are not doing what you want in the end. And so I try to, and I tell this to artists all the time when we're talking about records, talking about projects, social media, whatever. You got to think as big of term as you can, as long of term as you can, especially at the beginning, because we get wrapped up in like next year, next semester, this week, final, midterm, jury, blah, 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 blah. Like, it's not about that. It's about this bigger amount of time of making progress towards something. Thanks for being here, and we'll catch you soon.